we'll get started. If you weren't on last week, I'm Phil Woolery, Purdue Extension in Stark County and Pulaski County. And today we're going to be talking about field crop diseases. So we have Darcy Talenko, our field crop disease specialist, online with us. Some kind of housekeeping stuff to go over. I've got you all muted, so if you have questions, leave them in the chat. There should be at the bottom of the screen, you can button for this as chat. You can ask your questions there, and then I think at different spots we can have those questions asked, and then at the end as well. So without further ado, we'll have Darcy take over, and she can get started.
Okay. Well, thank you, Phil. So again, yeah, if you have any questions as I'm going along, it's kind of hard just to talk to the screen. So please feel free to try to chat them, and I'll try to stop and pause. And I built in some pauses just to ask as we move through some of these things. I definitely would prefer if we were in this in person. I'd rather talk to a crowd in person and share live samples of what we're seeing. But I just thought I'd review some of the things we're looking at here this season, what we're watching for, what my program's still trying to keep track of, and just give you an overview of the diseases we're looking at wheat and some things in soybean, and then finish up a little bit with corn and a touch on tar spot. So I'm just going to get started. I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully this will all work. So here, oops, did that go? No. Now it'll go. Hold on. All right. So you should be seeing my PowerPoint. And the display setting, hold on a sec. There, is that good? You see the slideshow, Phil? Okay. I can't see the questions, so Phil, if you can interrupt me when I pause, if you get questions, that will be helpful. So again, today I just wanted to give a crop disease outlook for Indiana, talk about some of the work we've been looking at, and just what to keep an eye out this season as we continue to get things in the ground. I'm just going to start some resources that are available. If you're online, you can follow me on Twitter. We do have a Purdue Field Crop website, and I'm going to try to go through to it right now and see if it'll work. I just want to show you some things that are on there that could be useful tools. So on our website, as it's loading here, I try to keep an update of the blog. So some of the articles will be put out here in the Pest and Crop if you get those annually. Also, if you're interested, I have embedded the tar spot map. So as we see active counties, that'll be there through the season. If you scroll down, there's also the map of showing where we confirmed it last year, just to kind of give you an idea of the background of where we know it might be overwintering. There's also a southern rust map and other things there. So this is just a resource you could reference if you're looking for some of that information that's around the state. Okay, and back to the slideshow. It worked?
Oh. We didn't go to the website. We were still on the...
You didn't? Okay, so then I didn't. So let me, all right. Well, let me see if I can do it then. Hold on. We'll go to the website here real quick. I'll share my screen. Hold on. So I saw it, but you didn't. Let me find it again here. Okay. Sorry, see all these, too many things open. Where is it? Hold on. All right, let me try this again. Share screen. Did it pop up now? Here it is. Okay. Sorry. So here, now can you see it? Okay. So just an example, the website is available. It keeps an updated blog of the different articles I may put out on the web on Pest and Crop. It does have the embedded tar spot map, the previous season map, and then if southern rust moves in, we have those as well. Already for this season, I can show you that they found southern rust on corn down in South Texas. So that's kind of where we track that disease. These are also available in their separate websites, but just as an inclusive of all the information that's here available for Indiana. So let me go back to my PowerPoint. Right here. Okay. Okay, and so there's just some other resources that are available if you're looking for information, and of course you can always reach out to me as well. Let's see if I can get it to move ahead. Okay, so I just want to review some of looking at the diseases across Indiana. This is looking at 2018 data, just what we're looking at the diseases we saw. So in Indiana, the top diseases in 2018, we did see a lot of tar spot in northern Indiana, stalk rots and gray leaf spot. We also had a lot of Frogeye come in at the that wet season there in 2018. It was very much lower this 2019. We just I don't have all 2019 data together yet. And then last year we did see a lot of Fusarium head blight. So just as some of the summary of some of the diseases we see and how much loss we do see to some of the crops here in Indiana. And I thought I'd just start a review of basic concepts for disease management in field crops. We're going to always, as always, I generally start with the disease triangle. So when we're thinking about the diseases in field crops, the first thing we have to understand is, is the host there, is it susceptible to whatever disease we're looking at, or that field have a history of that disease? Are we planting a crop back into that field that may be susceptible to disease? And then also is the pathogen there. So if we're looking at gray leaf spot or frogeye leaf spot, they're overwintering in the residue. So that pathogen's endemic, it's already going to be present. So then the next factor that needs to occur then is that favorable environment. And that is the key for all of these diseases, is what does the environment look like? Is it favorable for that disease? Is there the right temperature, moisture, leaf wetness available for that disease to take off in the crop canopy? If it's hot and dry, many of our fungal pathogens aren't going to replicate and reproduce rapidly. So we're going to have less risk for that disease in that season. And that may mean that we don't need to add additional inputs like a fungicide if the diseases are going to be relatively low. But it's when that environment becomes favorable for that disease, if we have a lot of moisture up in northern Indiana, it's going to cause tar spot to explode in those areas that had a history of that pathogen is overwintering, and that the species of the plant is there to infect. So again, it's the environment that's going to cue which diseases are going to be a problem in each season. When we look at managing diseases, the first thing we need to really identify is, can we find some genetic resistance? If we have that an annual problem with gray leaf spot or frogeye, can we find varieties or hybrids that have resistance to that? And that will reduce that risk for the disease to develop in that crop canopy. We can also look at using crop rotation or sanitation as ways to try to reduce that inoculum that may be surviving year to year in a field. Those won't be as effective, especially in our short-term rotations, but that is something we can look at. And then finally, it's making that decision. Do we want to add that additional fungicide application? When we're looking at corn, generally for gray leaf spot, northern corn leaf blight, the VTR1 is our standard application timing, whereas in soybeans, we're looking at R3 to try to control frogeye leaf spot. So again, the important thing of making that decision, we need to scout those fields early. Is the disease active in that lower canopy? Does it really justify putting out a fungicide application to pay for that, to pay for it? And the idea is we want to protect that photosynthetic leaf area and the ear leaf or the upper canopy during those reproductive stages when we know those diseases, if they get out of hand, are going to cause significant yield losses. So again, these different tactics affect that pathogen triangle in different ways. As you can see, most of them are affecting either the host or pathogen. The one thing we really can't control is those environmental conditions. Now, if we have irrigation in a field, maybe we can play a little bit with that water and the amount of leaf wetness that's available for that disease. But again, mainly we're looking at trying to reduce the risk by modifying the host or the pathogen. But again, we can't, the weather's one thing we cannot predict or control. And then when we're really looking at making a fungicide application, I've used this image many times, is the idea is we're out in the crop canopy, we're looking for those diseases that we're trying to control with a fungicide. So that would be frogeye leaf spot, gray leaf spot in corn, northern corn leaf blight, and now maybe tar spot. Is that disease active in the lower canopy? Can we find those disease symptoms in the lower canopy? If it is active, again, that may trigger, yes, the environmental conditions are going to be favorable. We're going to have a lot of rain in the area. Then yes, we may need to put a fungicide application out there to protect that timeline of when the disease is going to be active and when the disease is going to affect the yield of the crop. We put that fungicide out and it's going to have a window of protection. Generally 2 to 3 weeks is what we see on many of our products that are out there. And the idea is we want to time it appropriately when the disease is going to be active and when it's going to affect that yield potential. Maybe in another field, we can wait a little longer and put a residual protection out that may extend it further into the end of the season. So again, it's just understanding that sometimes, we need to look at whether the disease is active and then make a timely fungicide application to protect that crop yield. And then again, if the disease doesn't happen till the end of maturity and the corn is almost, or the soybean yields are already made, then we really don't need to worry about controlling that disease pathogen in the end of the season. This may change slightly with what we're learning with tar spot. We may need to think about some later applications, but again, we're still learning about that disease as we move on the next few seasons. So again, what we're doing when we're making a fungicide application is we want to put it out when the disease is going to impact yield. If we put a fungicide out early on in early vegetative stages, we're not going to have the protection available once we reach the reproductive stages to manage some of those diseases if a fungicide goes out early. So then you may need to think about if their diseases are ramping up. A second fungicide application might be necessary to control those later diseases that move into the crop canopy. There's been some work done looking at gray leaf spawn, and the idea is we want to protect that ear leaf around the ear. And so here's just looking at how much of that ear leaf was diseased by the end of the season and that approximate yield loss that occurred. So if we can keep the ear leaf to 5% or less disease, then we're really not going to see much yield loss occur in that field. As the disease takes out more of that ear leaf, when we get the 25 to 75% of that ear being lost to the disease, that's when we start seeing that 10 to 20% yield losses. And then if we lose the leaf, we can lose up to that 50% of that yield. So that's kind of the idea, is we're trying to protect that ear leaf or protect that upper canopy in soybeans to get the maximum yield benefit from that crop. And then finally, the other thing to think about is your cost per acre and how much do you need to protect to recover that cost. So this is just a table looking at corn prices and the cost of your fungicide application. So if we're around the $3 to $4 corn, our fungicides range from $15 to $35 an acre or more. You know, you need to see 5 to 12 bushels in order, you need to be protecting that amount of bushels in order to get the return on that investment for that fungicide application. So again, that's one of the other things to think about. You know, is a disease a problem in your field? Is it becoming active? Is it going to be justified to put a fungicide out there? Are we going to be able to get their return on investment if we do put that protection out there to minimize that disease impact? So those are some of the things to consider. And then if you're thinking about making a fungicide application, we do have some resources available on the efficacy of the different fungicides. So there's corn, wheat, and soybean available here at the Crop Protection Network. If you just search Crop Protection Network and get to it, you can find the resources. I have links also on my website. But what we've done is we go annually through the fungicide list of active ingredients that we know are out there, and we try to rate them for what we've seen in our research plots on how effective they are for various diseases. So this is just an example of one that's available for corn diseases. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So it lists by the fungicide classes and active ingredients, and then you have your mixed modes of action, and then you can cross-reference with the various diseases. So I've pulled up here northern corn leaf blight, southern rust, and tar spot. And the idea is, if you're looking to manage 2 or more diseases, you can cross-reference and try to identify those products that may show very good to good, excellent control for those various diseases. So here's just an example of quilt, and it has a very good for northern corn leaf blight, very good for southern rust, and good to very good for tar spot. We did pull tar spot data in from last year. I want to acknowledge it's just 1 year of data. So we kind of just ranked the products. If they showed really good activity, they got a good to very good. But we still need multiple more years of data to really separate them out if there's some that are falling to the top of the group or not. But generally, a well-timed fungicide will help manage some of those diseases. But again, if you look at a different product here, Vortex, the combination, you can see it's rated for northern corn leaf blight and southern rust, but there's no label for tar spot. So that's just something, a useful table to try to identify what products you may want to try to use in your crops if you're looking for certain diseases. If you're in the northern part of the state, you're probably looking more for northern corn leaf blight and tar spot. Southern part of the state, you may be considering something with southern rust in it. So these are just some useful tools that are available to try to get an idea of what products you may want to use. And so things on scouting, just be aware of the diseases. We try to keep everybody updated on what we're finding. We scout regularly to identify those issues and then decide if fungicides are needed. And then, you know, it is important to track the history of a disease for individual fields. Particular soil-borne ones are those that are an annual problem. It's good to know which fields may have a higher risk for certain diseases. My team tries to put out reports for current trends and these maps for what we're seeing nationally and statewide. Understand that we'll try to report when we see counties or states that have active disease and keep you updated on what those diseases we should be watching for. So that's just a quick overview of general disease scouting. Are there any quick questions as I ran through that real fast? Give you a few minutes. No? No questions? Okay. So now I'm just going to quickly touch on wheat. So I'm going to shift a little bit. What I did is I broke it down between wheat, and I'm going to talk a little bit about seedling diseases, a little bit about soybeans, and then finish up with corn. So that's kind of how I'm going to break it apart today. So this is just a list of all the different diseases we might see here in Indiana on wheat. My program is doing a lot of research on looking at Fusarium head blight with a national program. We also monitor for leaf and stem and stripe rusts. There's a national map that's tracking that now, and I know there's been some activity, on that. Let me go back again. I must have an automatic play on that slide. And then I also, right now, haven't seen much other than we do see a little bit of, I've seen some reports on septoria around, and we're watching, again, for Fusarium head blight. I know wheat got hit real hard with some cold weather this spring, so I think that's more of the damage we might see in some of those lower leaves. But now that we got a wheat heading out, it is time to think about if you need to be putting out a fungicide spray to control Fusarium head blight. So again, we're doing some research on Fusarium head blight. This is a summary of the 26 trials we've run across the United States the last 2 years. And so what they're really found is that most of the treatments we have available for us do reduce Fusarium head blight, and they keep the DON levels low if the applications are made within the first 6 days of anthesis or flowering. So we have a little range of a window there when we can get those fungicides out, but it is important to get it around those flowering stages in order to reduce the risk for DON development. Again, we also looked at the difference between susceptibility. So here's just an example of moderate resistant varieties, moderately susceptible MS, and then susceptible varieties. And the idea is that a highly susceptible variety, we are going to see more effect of that fungicide application in reducing disease. The Fusarium Mirabis ACE at anthesis on a moderate resistant is the lowest means or the lowest amount of disease that developed. And then the DON levels are definitely protected if we put that fungicide on at anthesis. So again, it's really important if you have issues with Fusarium head blight that we're getting fungicides out there at that flowering anthesis stage. We ran some fungicide trials in 2019, looking at various products, and oops, I clicked it ahead. And so most of the products do reduce Fusarium head blight as expected, and they did reduce DON, and we had a lot of Fusarium head blight in our trials. We had almost 32% of those heads infected, and they did see that this last year we do see a yield boost with putting that fungicide out because we lost a lot of that seed to Fusarium head blight. So again, we saw severity of Fusarium head blight in 2019. That means there is a lot of inoculum probably available in those fields. So we'll be watching the weather. Cool, wet conditions are what's going to promote this disease. And again, it's important to, if you have access to moderate resistant cultivars, try to incorporate those and then make that fungicide application at anthesis. So that's a real quick review of wheat. Any questions on wheat or any other issues in wheat that people are seeing? I know we have just pockets of where we have wheat grown in Indiana. Nothing? Answered them all for wheat today. Okay, and then I'm just going to move into seed and seedling diseases. When we got out there and got lots of corn planted at the end of April, and then it went cold. And I know there was a real slowdown and worry of what was going to go on, how long were seed protectants going to be out there. And I think now is the time to keep an eye out to see if we're seeing any seedling diseases appear. So this is the types of damage we might see with some of those soil-borne pathogens that cause seed and seedling diseases. First, you might have rotting seed, especially if it's cool and wet after we get the corn or soybeans in the field and they're not germinating rapidly. We might find rotted seed out there. Many of the pathogens that cause these diseases are opportunistic. So they're going to go after those weakened plants. We might see damping off occur, especially in wet areas that were cool and wet. Again, it's that loss of some of those that stand. And then finally, there could be a seedling blight. So again, the pathogen got in and is causing the plant to blight off early in the season. So there are a number of pathogens that cause these seedling diseases. Generally in Indiana, we might see a Fusarium, Rhizoctonia, Phytophthora, Pythium, and then sometimes at the end of the season, we might get some Phomopsis seed rot that moves in. It is important to understand which pathogen might be a problem in particular fields, because the Fusarium Rhizoctonia may have a different group of seed treatments that be most effective versus the Phytophthora and Pythium. So if you're not sure which pathogen is the problem in a field, I would suggest sending a sample into the clinic to get a diagnostic report to understand which pathogens may be there. And it's possible you may have 1 or 2 or 3 affecting the same plant. Generally, these pathogens can survive in the soil for long periods of time, and they can infect many crops. So we really don't use crop rotation to try to manage seedling diseases. And the no-till reduced systems may also see that this cooler, wet weather, you may need to increase your seed treatments to protect those crops because they're just a little slower growing. And then again, it's understanding that you may need an accurate diagnosis to make sure your seed treatments are going to be efficacious against the different pathogens. So again, those Pythium and Phytophthora, they're oomycetes. They have a different set of seed treatments that are effective against them versus the Rhizoctonia and Fusarium. So the idea when we put out a fungicide treatment is we want to manage those soil-borne pathogens that cause these rots and damping off and seedling rots. And it also may help manage pathogens that may be on that surface of the seed, such as smut of barley and oats, wheat bunt, and downy mildew. And then sometimes it may help manage some of those seed-borne pathogens as well as loose smut. But a fungicide treatment is not going to improve the seed quality. It's there to protect the seed and help it germinate and get that crop out of the ground, but it may not improve the seed quality if you start off with poor seed quality to begin with. So we can apply seed treatments. They're a protective coating before planting. Again, they protect from the soil-borne or seed-borne fungi, and they can protect a little bit to get that if you have poor quality seed, to get that plant up and germinated, but it's not going to improve the number of the number that's with the seed quality. And then again, that's the idea of using the seed treatments. So important to think about, what is your field history before we put on seed treatments? Do you have diseases that are a problem like SDS? Are we going to be planting in cool, wet soils below 60 degrees? Then we really should consider putting on a fungicide seed treatment. Is there a lot of surface residue that may keep that soil cooler during the day? Has there been a history of flooded soil where we need to protect from some of those waterborne pathogens, the Pythium and the Phytophthora? And then have you seen that history of seed-borne fungal infection, or do you know that you have some poor quality seed coming to be planted? So those are some things to consider when we're looking at fungicide treatments. I know we're a little beyond that, but that's just some of the questions to be thinking about in the future. And now, if we're out there and we're starting to see those seed or seedling issues, it's a good time to take a sample and get a diagnosis of what pathogen it is, so you know what you need to put on the seeds for future seasons. So in general, our corn is mostly pre-treated with one fungicide mode of action. Wheat and soybean may or may not be treated. And again, it's important to understand that field history of each disease and whether we have cool or wet weather coming in. So in soybeans, it's recommended put seed treatments on when we're going early and we're going to plant in cold and wet soils. If they're reduced till or no-till fields, if we have low germination seed, or low seed populations, in order to just try to get the most germinated plants out of that seed stock. And then the efficacy is going to depend on the mode of action. How was the seed treated? What is that rate on that seed? And then how was it planted? So again, the soil conditions that planting and immediately following are going to affect how that fungicide treatment works. And the amount of disease or the history of that field may also affect that. And they can compound, if the seed's still sitting there not germinating for 3 weeks, that's when we may start running out of that fungicide treatment on that seed and may increase that risk to see some of those seedling or seed rot diseases. So when we're out scouting and we're starting to see weakened plants or loss of plants, you can dig up the seedlings and see if you can see any seed rot issues. So I'm just going to go through some examples of what we see out in the field. So this is an example of Fusarium root rot. It causes a dark lesion to form on that lower stem and in the roots. And sometimes it can extend up into the hypocotyl. I would say, looking at some of these seedling diseases, the symptoms look quite alike. So that's why it's important, if you want to really understand what's going on in your field, you can send a sample into our clinic, and they can plate it out and really determine which pathogen is causing the biggest problem. This is an example of Pythium. It causes more of a wet rot on those seedlings. So you can see you still have this dark necrosis and a little wetter rot. You sometimes might see the mycelium growing over the plant. But again, generally this disease is going to be in those wet spots of the field if you had a history of it. Pythium can infect both corn and soybeans. Again, they're opportunistic pathogens. They're going to attack the plants when they're weak and not growing as fast. And so that's when these diseases start to appear. Here is Phytophthora root rot. It also causes a water-soaked stem and lesion. Again, this one is like Pythium, favored by the wet conditions after planting, but it may like the warmer soils versus the cooler soils of Pythium. And with Phytophthora, it can infect the plant at any time during the season, and later on, as the plants get older, you might see a chocolate lesion develop on that stem versus causing these seedling diseases. And then finally, Rhizoctonia. This one I generally think of as a dry rot. It causes a red dry rot on the stem, generally at that soil line. The lesion may be sunken. But again, it is kind of hard to distinguish between these various symptoms. And if you really want to understand what's going on in your field, sending us a sample is the best way to get positive identification. So any quick questions here? I'll take a pause on seedling diseases, or anybody seeing any issues with seedling diseases this season. I know we were worried about that, things not getting up out of the ground.
Darcy, Marty Park here, Northwest Indiana. We've really been clobbered with rainfall and cool weather, and started seeing seedling blight in corn over the weekend.
Okay.
Some fields it's really, really bad. Some of the guys are starting to replant because they got pockets that didn't come up, but you cannot see it from the cab of the tractor with the 24-row planter yet, where you need to plant and where you shouldn't be planting. But in a few days, a lot of those plants are going to be dead. So if we wanted to send you a sample, how many plants do you need? I mean, do you need a handful? Do you need one? What do you need, like on corn, and how quickly do we need to get it to you so that you don't end up with secondary things happening?
Right. So I would try to get it sooner than later. If you're starting to see symptoms, get them out of the field, because the longer they're there, the more pathogens are going to move in. Sending a sample, I would recommend more than one, ideally a handful. And what I'd also like to see is a range of symptoms. So maybe some really dead, some medium dead, and then maybe some that are healthy that if you dug them up, you still can find lesions, because then we can kind of see how it's developing. But I'd say a handful from a field is enough if you can get a range of symptoms. And then I would wrap them, if you go to the diagnostic lab, they have some guides on how to wrap the material. And then I would try to get it to the clinic within a day or two. If you can ship it, a couple days and get that faster, that'll help. And then not ship on Friday. So ideally, I would suggest sampling Monday or Tuesday, getting them off by Wednesday so the clinic has them by Friday. Because if they sit in the shipping somewhere or sit overnight, we're not going to get them over the weekend. But that would be my suggestion, especially if you don't know what's going on in that field. You can send those and they'll try to run that.
If you see a brown kind of water-soaked lesion either on the plumule leaf or the first leaf kind of out at the tip, but it looks like you've got maybe 3 of the permanent roots that are an inch long or so, do you think that plant's going to make it, or is it going to die?
Well, I guess I would look at, did you get hit with cold? I mean, how much can you see the green growing point is my question.
Yeah.
Is the growing point still green and active? So then that may come out of it. And then whether it's a pathogen or abiotic would be whether if you have a pathogen is going to be more in the one spot, or is if the whole field has that burn, that's going to tell me that it was cold injury or something else.
Yeah.
And you might just want to see how much of that growing point is still there. I mean, Bob last week probably may have talked about the corn that we had out at Acre got burned off, but the growing point was below the soil line, so it didn't lose the growing point. It's the soybeans that if they got hit with that growing point, I'm not sure they'll come back.
Yeah, this is a seedling. This is some sort of a seedling blight or something. It's fresh.
Okay.
It's just hard to tell whether the corn's going to make it or not, but it looks like it's gotten permanent roots, so hopefully it'll overcome it.
That'll be the thing to watch.
You don't have any permanent roots going yet.
Yeah, and how much of that, let me see if I can, so how much of that root system have you lost when you dig it up? I don't have any good corn ones.
Yeah, I can send pictures.
Or send some pictures and I could say, then that's, feel free to always do that. Send me a picture and say, what do you think? Should we send some stuff in to figure out?
Hey, this is Tom.
Tom's on too, so here we go.
In the chat, I just put our clinic form up there for you if you need that. And Todd Abramson's phone number, he'd be glad to help you with any questions about shipping. I also put in there how to sample corn, but that's really focused on the foliar disease problems later in the year. When we're looking at seedling diseases, one really good way of doing that is to get heavy-duty aluminum foil and make a double layer of that, and then just lift those seedlings out and lay them in a sheet of aluminum foil and fold that over to make a little pouch to keep the soil intact around those roots as much as you can. And send at least 10 seedlings or 20 or whatever you can lay your hands on. Don't scrimp on this. There's plenty of them dead out there, so send them to us. You don't need to keep them.
But you want with soil.
Some soil, not a lot, but some soil kept around the roots to keep them from drying out, because we want to still be able to find and still be able to isolate, you know, Pythium and Rhizoctonia and anything else, Phytophthora, that may be showing up there. And if they've dried out too much, it's hard to make those isolations. So that's why I want you to put it in that heavy aluminum foil and make a little pouch for it. And then you can put it in a plastic bag for shipping. Make sure it's in a sturdy box. It doesn't get crushed in shipping too.
Thank you, Tom. I didn't know you were on. Is there any other questions before I move on? I would rather much do this than ask questions all day for the hour. That would work for me, instead of me just talking to a blank screen. Okay, so I'm just going to switch a little bit and talk just what we're watching for soybean diseases. So I've made a list here of all the soybean diseases we generally see about in Indiana. Again, so right now we're watching for those Phytophthora, Fusarium, Rhizoctonia infections in those seedlings. I will note in a little bit, will be interested in some soybean cyst nematode samples at the end of the season. And then generally a lot of our programs looking at Frogeye and SDS and how do we manage some of those diseases. Here's a picture of Phytophthora I mentioned earlier. And so this is what Phytophthora looks like as the plants get older. It has this chocolate stem canker that can form. Generally Phytophthora, it loves the water. So those where we have extended periods of moisture, it can infect and cause disease, again, beginning at seedling emergence and beyond. Generally, we manage this through resistant varieties and then seed treatments as well for Phytophthora. SDS, the infection of SDS is occurring right now. So it's occurring here in the spring when the Fusarium is getting into those roots. So this cool, wet weather that we had, if we had soybeans out and they're starting to grow, that's when the Fusarium is going to get in. We do try to manage sudden death syndrome with using some partial resistance that's available. And then there is a seed treatment, the Levo seed treatment can help, and there's a couple other ones coming on market as well. And so we continue to evaluate some of these products to see how well they may protect that seed plant from being infected by Fusarium. Along with the sudden death syndrome, if we sometimes will see areas that have high soybean cyst nematodes, will also increase the soybean sudden death syndrome symptoms. So again, I think it's important to keep an eye on your fields and understand your count numbers for soybean cyst nematodes. If you have issues in the season and you dig up the roots, you may find the females infecting those soybean roots. And here's just an example of these little tiny white dots are the SCN females feeding on the root. The good news here at Purdue is we have hired a nematologist. He will be moving out here in August. And he's looking for samples across Indiana for SEN. So we'll be putting a call at the end of the season. We want to collect as many as we can across the state. He'll do nematode counts for you. And then also what we want to do is look at the HD type and see if we're seeing any of the resistance develop that we're seeing out that other states have reported. But the good news is we'll have a nematologist here. We'll be putting a call out later in the season to try to get soil samples in to him so he can start working on some research for that. But again, we know SEN is across the state, so it is something to think about if you're starting to see a weakened crop or the crop looks a little yellow than it's been in previous years. I would suggest taking a sample and getting the counts done and looking for those females infecting the roots. And finally, for Frogeye leaf spot is one disease we keep an eye on, and this is one we're looking at whether we want to put a fungicide out. Last year, we didn't see hardly any Frogeye, but we know it's out there. In 2018, we got hit pretty hard. It likes warm temperatures, but again, it's just the moisture period. When we have these extended periods of moisture, that environmental factor on the triangle, that's when we need to be scouting and looking for it. Generally, when we're trying to scout to make a decision for Frogeye, We're scouting around R1, R2. Is the disease active in the lower canopies? Do we see that we're going to get a lot of rain in the forecast? That might justify putting a fungicide out at the R3 stage. So this is just an example of what happened at the end of 2018. We did have a lot of frogeye moving a lot of canopies across the state. It causes these lesions on the pods and stems, and then also can cause this degradation of the seeds, and we have this whole plate is frogeye infected seeds. So again, reducing seed quality at the end of the season. The other big question we get with frogeye is fungicide resistance. I'm going to skip past this. And so we do know that we do have fungicide strobilurin resistance here in Indiana. It's been confirmed only in 4 counties, Clark, Delaware, Fountain, and Pulaski. But if you look at the map, those 4 counties are spread across Indiana. So in general, I assume we have strobilurin resistance in our populations across the state. I do have a grad student who's been trying to collect samples. She started last year. We were able to get into 12 counties to get some frogeye symptoms from those counties. Right now, we're at a holding pattern to continue to evaluate those until we can get back in the lab. But we'll be continuing to test those to see if they have QOI resistance, and we'll be looking for more samples again this year. So if you see frogeye out in your field, and if you put a fungicide out and it's not working, we would really be interested in getting some of those leaf samples into our lab to continue to evaluate how far the QOI resistance has spread here in Indiana. But again, if you're looking to manage frogeye, you start first if you can find soybean varieties that have resistance. Rotating away with corn will help minimize the inoculum that's surviving year to year in a field. And then if we're going to make a fungicide application during the season, the idea is to scout early, is the disease active, and then look at something other than just a product that has just QOI in it. The DMIs and the thiophanates will help manage, control that. So if you look for a mixed mode of action product that has multiple groups in it, that should be effective in trying to manage frogeye this season. So again, those tables are available in that soybean efficacy table that I showed earlier. I showed the corn, but there's a soybean one, so you can kind of try to identify those products that may be really efficacious against frogeye. Some other diseases I have been seeing, Cercospora leaf blight is appearing here and there, so we're keeping an eye on that. We do a little white mold trials as well and use some of that prediction modeling to try to manage that disease. So any questions on soybeans before I move ahead to corn? We're clear, Phil? Okay. So I'm just going to turn here to corn. Again, we have a number of foliar diseases we keep an eye on. I think gray leaf spot's the one we see across the state most years. We have pockets of northern corn leaf blight. Sometimes common rust was across the state. We generally don't worry about that one as a yield limiting pathogen, but we do monitor for southern rust, and I'm going to talk about that next. There is a pocket of Gauss's wilt. Since I've been here at Indiana, we haven't had any samples come into the clinic or my lab, but we do know there's probably a couple pockets out there of Gauss's wilt. We are starting to see a little bit more of Physoderma brown spot. This one, actually, the disease gets into the canopy in the whorl stage. It splashes into the whorl, but we won't see the symptoms to the end of the season. In general, that we don't really use fungicides to try to control this one, but we are, I think I've had more reports this last year of seeing a lot of Physoderma, so we'll be keeping an eye on that one. And then I'm going to end a little bit and talk a little bit about tar spot and just watching for our stalk rots and ear rots. And generally, you should understand which fields have a higher risk of those developing. So a little bit about southern rust. This disease does not overwinter here in Indiana. So every year we track it moving up through the U.S. And as I showed you on that map earlier, we do know that there's some activity down in South Texas already. So we'll be watching that map. I'm not going to worry about it until I start seeing it in Missouri or Kentucky. And then we're really going to get out and start calling to keep an eye out for this to move into Indiana. The problem with southern rust is if it moves in early, we may need to put a fungicide out to manage it. Last year, we did have the situation where the crop was a month behind and southern rust moved in around July, and usually we don't see it to August. So we were worried that we may need to put out some more fungicides to control that. I really didn't hear of a lot of reports where it really exploded in the canopy, but again, that's something we do keep an eye on in southern Indiana particularly. For southern rust, we need a sample to confirm it. So I can't turn a county red that we have a positive sample unless I have that sample in my hands and we can go look at it under the microscope because we really need to look at the spores to try to determine whether it's southern rust versus common rust. So again, if you suspect you have southern rust, please send us a sample or send me an email, send us a picture, and we'll tell you yes or no. We would like to see that sample sent in here to the clinic. So again, this is kind of the map of last year of where we tracked southern rusted corn. So again, it did move up through Indiana. It got up into Michigan by the end of the season. But generally, I don't think we saw a significant amount of disease to cause yield impacts, but it is something we watch. I know in the southern states, they may be spraying for southern rust 2 or 3 times, depending on how rapid it moves in their crop during the season. So it's just something we keep a monitor and keep an eye on during the season. We'll be tracking again this year. We did evaluate fungicides for foliar diseases in southern Indiana. So we did get some southern rust, northern corn leaf blight, gray leaf spot down there in southern Indiana. This trial looked at both looking at the application timing at the VTR1 stage and also the R3. So if we hold off a little bit and wait till a little later application, will we still be able to manage the diseases? So looking at these various products for southern rust, all the products that we evaluated really significantly were effective against southern rust. So any of the products worked, and either timing worked. So depending when you could get in, either the VTR1 and the R3 did reduce southern rust as compared to the non-treated. We only got about 12% disease, so maybe a little bit of yield loss, but not much. Looking at the other diseases, northern corn leaf blight, some of the products did separate in southern Indiana. There's a few that earlier worked better later than they did earlier. But again, there's some different choices you have depending on the diseases that appear. And then all the products were better, significantly reduced the disease of gray leaf spot. Again, our untreated only got 4%. So really there wasn't enough disease there to really justify a fungicide application at that point. And that's why we didn't see any significant changes in yield on those fungicides being applied. But it is good to know that these products are available and they can be in that tool chest for managing some of these diseases. And if the diseases stay low, that's where we're not going to get the yield loss benefit. But if we do have a ramp up of the disease, they will provide some protection and yield protection there. And so the shifting gears, I'm going to talk a little bit about tar spot. I know a lot of you are more in northern Indiana. So these are just some of the things I want to consider this season. So first, do you have a history of tar spot on the farm? Have you seen it? Do you know it's going to be there? That I'm going to want you out there scouting and looking for it early on. It's probably going to be a problem this year. Where we've seen tar spot, and this is a yearly distribution of the map here in Indiana, and where we found it since 2015. So we first found tar spot in 2015. The samples were all sent into the clinic, and 16 and 17 again were samples that were sent in. 18 and 19 were years where my team tried to get out and try to scout the state. But as you can see, it generally focuses around northern Indiana, and that's where we think we see this is going to be an annual problem for tar spot to occur. We do know it's probably throughout the whole state, but again, I'm worried about the northern part of the state. So this, again, a similar tracking map for tar spot. We'll be starting this again in 2020. We're changing the colors a little bit, but it still just means, yes, the disease is active in that season in that county. So if you're in that county or around that county, then maybe you need to be getting out and looking for that disease to see if it's out there in your fields. So this was the final map of 2019. So you can see this kind of shows where we had tar spot in previous years, and then the bright red is where we added a new county in 2019. So as you can see, the disease continued to spread west across Iowa. We added Minnesota, and Missouri also found it. But you can see also we're seeing it spread a little further south here in Indiana. But that was mainly my team trying to get out and scour to see if we can even find any 1 or 2 lesions out there. This map gives us an idea of where we find something active. It really doesn't tell you the severity of the disease. And I'll show you the map here shortly on what we found here in Indiana. So the 2018 was the first year that we did see some yield losses from tar spot. We estimate about 30 bushels per acre is what was lost in those heavily hit fields. In those fields, every plant has tar spot on it. It pretty much spreads across the whole field. And generally, it's getting that 50% severity on ear leaf is when we're seeing that plant rapidly blight, shut down early, and it's just not finishing the crop. So again, there are 9 states that have tar spot. We estimated, I can't see that, about 3% losses in northern Indiana is what we saw from the 2018 epidemic. So when you're out scouting or looking for tar spot, if you've had that history, what we're looking for is this actual tar spot appearing on that leaf. It's caused by Phyllocoramatus. This pathogen is only known really to infect maize. It produces these black oval head pinheads, stroma, and they may or may not have a necrotic area surrounding it. They produce ascospores and canidia that help continue that disease cycle through the season. We do not believe it to be seed-borne, but we do know it's probably surviving on that corn residue year to year in a field. So this is our general life cycle of what we're thinking is going on with Phyllocorum. Again, we believe it's overwintering in that infected residue in the stroma, and then once we have those ideal environmental conditions, those stroma release the ascospores up into that lower canopy, and they can be ejected up to 250 feet out of the literature that we've reviewed, and then they produce what we call these stromata. They're little black specks, and that's the tar spot. Generally, it takes 14 to 21 days for us to see that stroma form after that infection, and then from that point, those new ascospores can be released and continue to spread up through that upper canopy and cause this severe disease symptomology that we see here. And then the cycle is going to repeat until the end of the season, and then that diseased tissue is what's going to be shed down into the field for future seasons. We also know that this disease is moving on weather systems, so those spores must get enough to get up into those weather systems and move across. So that's what happened in Iowa, is it was moving with the weather. So those spores are being blown from one field to another through as it continues to evolve and develop. So the one thing when we're out looking for tar spot is, it's the first thing to find it is a needle in the haystack this first part of the year when we're looking for it. So this is just an example of where I was trying to scout. We had gone to a field that had a bad history of tar spot in 2018. And we were out there about mid-July in 2019, and we were scouting around, and I was trying to scour where the crop canopy is a little closed, it's a little cooler in there. This disease likes it a little cooler, but there's still a lot of moisture within those leaves. And so this is finding just the needle in the haystack 1 week. And when you're looking for it, these stroma are really growing embedded in that tissue. So if you scratch at it, it's not going to come off. It looks like it's growing within the tissue, and it may have this raised black structure coming out of it. So this is kind of the first trying to find it, needle in the haystack. We went back a week later, and this is how rapid it can evolve. And so we went from one to a multitude of tar spots in that lower canopy. So you see how between 1 week, we can see this rapid development of the tar spots within the canopy. So again, these are the range of symptoms we might see developing on the leaves, from a few stroma to a multitude of stroma. It's when they get over to this hundreds of thousands of stroma on that leaf, that's when that leaf is shutting down, it's completely blighted, and we're losing that photosynthetic area to help finish off that crop. Generally, and we really don't know exactly what is required, I think we need almost a mature leaf for the infection to occur. So there may be a growth stage of the plant when the disease can get in, and then beyond that, once it's in, it seems to infect every possible tissue it can get on. But again, it needs this green succulent tissue in order for infection to occur, and that initial infection, and then the secondary infection seems to infect everything that they can get on. Some of the things when we were looking earlier is there's some lookalikes. So insect frass may mimic a tar spot, but if you wipe or scratch at that, it's going to come right off. Physoderma brown spot later on in the season may appear a little black speckly, but if you look at that, Physoderma is almost embedded in the tissue. There's no raised structure, and it has this diagnostic purpling of the midrib that may occur. And then southern and common rust, as they age, those pustules will turn dark, so they may mimic tar spot. But if you look closely at them, they've erupted that leaf surface as compared to the tar spot. It's really embedded in the surface. And I think the one reason we were missing it earlier on is that it kind of mimics these saprophytic fungi that move in our corn at the end of the season. So at this point, we're not really worried about diseases moving in, but there is still a distinction between the two if you're out there looking for it. So again, this is kind of the symptoms we saw last year in some of our fields that were hit again. You can see that rapid blighting of those lower leaves. And if you get close, you can see the numerous amount of those stromata forming on those upper leaves. And you can see that we get a rapid infection. There's hundreds of stromata that'll even infect the husks of the corn. So these are kind of the calls that I get, and when I get to the field like that point, I'm not sure there's much to do at that point. I know some of the farms have tried to spray at this point to try to protect what's left in green to try to finish that ear. But again, we're still working on some of those management tools and best options for timing our fungicides. We did get out and try to scout through Indiana. So this is kind of the places we were able to make last year before the end of the season. And what we did not only is try to find tar spot, but we rated those fields. So I could turn a county red if I have less than 1% severity on the leaf. So if I can find one tar spot stroma, that'll turn a county red and saying that disease is active. But it's the counties that I'm worried about that have this greater than 10% severity on their leaves, and that's where we're going to see the yield losses. So it's important to understand, yes, the disease may be there, but if we don't have the environmental conditions to push it, we won't need to worry about it. But it's in those other areas where the conditions have been highly conducive for the disease, it can rapidly ramp up and cause rapid blighting of the crop. So we went around and in those fields rated those as well. And so this is the index of risk that I kind of developed from last year. So we got on those counties, and so those counties that are the dark red to orange are the ones that had a problem in 2018. They still saw some problems in 2019. And some of the counties, they maybe need to be red. We only got in a few fields of each county. I can't get in everything. But it kind of tells me that in northern Indiana is where we're going to continue to see this problem annually, especially with pop-up showers or other moisture events. And then the rest of the states, it's important to know the disease is here. And if the conditions go cool and wet, we may need to keep a close eye to see if the disease is going to ramp up within those cornfields. Oops. So finally, the question is making a fungicide application. Is there going to be a return on investment for putting on a fungicide to try to control tar spot? Are fungicides going to be effective? So again, this is looking at our research plots up at Pinny. I got lucky that we do have a research farm where I can get good disease development, so I can try to do some of these research trials to try to better understand how to manage it. So this is here at Pennypack. We first found tar spot by the farm on the 13th of July, so that's finding that one lesion in the lower canopy. And we continue to monitor it bi-weekly to see how the disease developed in the crop canopy. So as you can see here, this is looking at the ear leaf +2 and the ear leaf -2, and tracking the amount of stroma that we could see on that ear leaf. So you can see it remains relatively low, and then all of a sudden around R5, it just exploded in that crop canopy. And that's where we see that rapid change as well of going from green to a blighted situation within the crop. So again, the disease remained low and then just slowly took off, and then all of a sudden just exponential increase in this, within the canopy when those conditions were conducive. So this is the difference between 2 weeks. So in that non-treated in September 21st, we were still finding 5 to 10% tar spot on those leaves. So it is easy to get out there and say, yes, the disease is active in the crop canopy, but then looking 2 weeks later, how rapidly it just blights the crop is something that is very astounding to me. And I know this is the shock of some of our farms that have gone out and gone to the field and said, oh great, the field looks great, it's green. And they go away for a week and come back and then it's completely blighted. So this is the problem with this disease, is we really need to keep an eye on it. Is it active in those lower leaves? Is there a potential for it to get up in that upper canopy? So again, understanding your fungicide timing, we need to put those fungicides down when they're going to most impact yield. And so we tried to look at efficacy and timing at our trials here in Indiana. We looked at various products, and there's a large number. The number of products that are constantly being labeled is continuing to increase. And so I just want to show you what we saw with some of the fungicides. So we went out with the standard VTR1 application timing. Again, our disease appeared on the 13th of July. Our application went out on the 8th of August. And so there's our non-treated disease curve and then the treated ones. So as you can see, if you look at this chart, all the fungicides, we shifted that disease curve. They shifted down, they provided protection, but as soon as those fungicides ran out of steam, the disease started to take off at the end of the season. Now by R6, the corn was already ready to be harvested, so there was no more disease to develop. If this disease had shifted further to the left, I'm not sure how well it would have managed to control it beyond that, or how much yield impact we would have had, and it might have justified another application of fungicide. So those are some of the questions we have on our plate to try to answer now this year and beyond. But again, this fungicide timing is going to be very critical for tar spot. It just so happened the VTR1 worked really well with the first detection about a month, 2 weeks after we first detected it in the lower canopy. And then if we look at the end of the season, most of the fungicides protect and reduce the necrosis that develops in the crop canopy. They kept it green longer, allowed that crop to try to reach its yield potential by the end of the season. This trial only had about 23% of tar spot up here on the non-treated. All the fungicides significantly reduced tar spot. We did not see the significant yield differences across the board. The range was, and I gotta move my, sorry, let me go back again. The range was about 3.5 to 21 bushels per acre with that fungicide application. We had a number of different trials out there. So this is an example, another trial that was out that had a little higher level tar spot development in the field. Again, similar trends, all those fungicides shift the disease cycle off, but then the disease takes off as soon as those fungicides run out of activity. Again, reduce necrosis, increase the stay green. But this one, we did see a higher level of tar spot develop. All the fungicides reduced disease, and we did see a statistically significant yield boost of 17 to 20 bushels per acre. And generally, that's what I was hearing as a well-timed fungicide this past year, protected about 17 to 20 bushels per acre with tar spot. So again, this is good news, as we can use some of these fungicides to protect that yield. This trial also showed some lodging effects. So we had about 17% lodging occur, and all the fungicides again protected that photosynthetic material. The crop wasn't starving its stalk, and kind of maintained that lodging risk and reduced that risk across the board. I pulled together all my trials. And about 7 of the 9, we did see a significant yield difference. That again, the severity gets up to that 35 to 40% on the ear leaf. The 2 trials that had no significant yield bump, they remained low, and they were 4 to 24%. So again, when we use a fungicide, it's all going to depend on how much disease is really active and how much yield benefit we get on the other end. So that's just something important to consider. And I know I'm getting close on time. I just wanted to show the other thing on timing is we did have different timings out there. The vegetative timings ran out early on that last year's season. So again, that VTR2 was our optimum timing for controlling tar spot. Sorry. And again, that VTR2 is where we reduced tar spot, maintained the stay green, and saw yield benefit. Again, almost 20 bushels per acre where we applied a fungicide. So the good news is a lot of our fungicides can protect against tar spot. They just have to be timed accordingly. And I don't have the answers of what happens if the disease moves in earlier or later. We may need to shift that timing. So that's kind of the work we'll be going on in the next few seasons. So I'm going to end and give some time for questions as we ran out of time. But we do have a model we're working at predicting when tar spot's going to be active. So any questions? You can always reach out if you have issues during the season. We'll be trying to keep you posted on different diseases that we're seeing. We're still about half planted, so we're chasing the rain clouds now of whether we can get in. Hopefully we're moving up and getting the tar spot trials in at Penny, which is good for us because we want the late season to capture all these diseases that move in. Any other issues you're seeing out there this spring or that you're worried about, other than wearing face masks and maintaining 6 feet of distance? Phil, do you have anything else to add, or?
No, let me get the. I'll have to put up our CCA.
Okay, I stopped share.
There. So here's info for our CCA credits for your commercial applicators. If you want to email me your license number, and I will get that entered for you. And we've still got time if you have any other questions. Tar spot with Darcy. I'm sure she would happy to answer those, but I think next week Darcy mentioned nematodes. We have a nematologist from Michigan State. She'll be coming in. It was on Monday the 1st. She'll be presenting. So All right, seeing no questions, we'll end it here. Thanks everyone for coming. I'm gonna send out an email with the link to the recording to everyone as well, in case you missed something. So everyone have a good day. We'll see you next week.